While we're waiting for our pages to dry, it's probably a good idea to begin to lay out where the mushroom's going to land on the page. So what I've done is drawn out about a half the size of the note cards, 4 different little squares here. I'm not sure if you can see the boundaries of that, but with a Sharpie now, I can go in and just quickly do thumbnail sketches of how I think these might work out. First, I want to mark out the space that I have to work with. And then think about the type and how it might land. Would it be over the top of the mushroom? Would it curve along the top of the mushroom? Would it go be top and bottom, all over one side? So, of course, this is a very good layout right here for type if I wanted it all lined up over here. So that's one option. Just have it be like this. And mine has 2 mushrooms. I'm not sure if this image is licensed, but there's another one very similar in your resources. I may just leave it like that and have my type line up over here. But I could also put it down here and have my type kind of be able to curve over it like that. So there's a couple options. I think I'll probably go with something like this because I like it over on this side for some reason. And sometimes it's totally an arbitrary decision. Sometimes it's aesthetic. The thing you don't want to do is, especially with something like this, plunk it down right dead in the center. We have a vertical sort of format here in this image, and the card is horizontal, so you have that to contend with. Knowing that I'm not going to put any of the background in there, just the mushroom, I think that maybe it should be on one side or the other. I'll probably again put it over to one side, but have it this time take up a lot more space. And I could even put my type over the top of it if I wanted. If this was if this background and the mushroom were sort of modulated in a way that they were not distinct, there was no gigantic contrast, you could probably read fairly well over this across the top of it, depending on what you do in terms of lettering. But I could also make it very small down here at the bottom and make the mushroom not be part of it nearly as important as the type. And the type be really big. So those are some considerations, and I'll figure out which one before I get very much further because I need to get it traced onto my paper. When it comes to the full sheet of my sketchbook, I have these 2 images that I'd like to work with, and this one I've blown up now to be big enough to actually trace from, because this one was a little more complex. I wanted to trace it. The others I'm just going to freehand draw. I love this one because it's got little elements of all the things that are out there in the forest, and I might incorporate them. And so I could do that in a number of ways. I could make that be the predominant story in this page, have this very large mushroom, but have it so that I could write over the top of it or even write in the cap of it, and then have the rest of the leaves and things over around the bottom. I could also compose it so that it's not so large that there's no room for type, and my elements of nature, the leaves and things, can go here, and maybe the type starts to go over the top of it or comes around the bottom of it. There's more room for type if I do it that way, unless I want to go right directly over the mushroom. So these were about a third of the size of the page. These were about a half a size of the original page, the actual page. So on this one, I'm already pretty sure that what I want to do is have those mushrooms be pretty large, this grouping of them along the side. And then just, 1 or 2 other elements, maybe just the fern. Maybe that would be all. And then my type could go down the side like this. If I made it a little bit smaller though, so that the mushrooms were in the bottom half of the image, and generally you want to split it up into thirds, so if this was a third and this was a third, you'd put them somewhere down in here to take up the bottom 2/3. Lovely mushrooms, aren't they? And then maybe the fern goes over here. But then I have a lot of room for type then. And so I think I'll probably go with that. And I may go with something like that. And so now I think I'm ready to go on to the next stage. we are ready now to go on to the next stage, which is to get the drawing onto the paper. And I did that with a paint marker. You'll find that a regular Sharpie won't write very well on all this that we've done underneath. And so I used this Craft Smart one. I have several that are fine enough to make a finer line. And I just freehand drew this one on, both of these on, just looking at my image. And I have those right here. So what I want to point out is I did not create that little line that separates the top of the mushroom and the bottom of its cap. I left that out for now, and I'll explain in a little bit here. And I just drew the stalk straight down. I didn't add any details to it. I didn't put anything else around it. Just wanted it to be a very graphic, flat shape. And I did the same with this one. It's this has a second cap down here and a little bit of an apron underneath, but I didn't separate them out. I just made it one flat graphic shape. And so what we're going to do now is paint around it. And we'll do that with just either a very watered down wash of a creamy color or something very neutral that will let some of the colors show through, so that we don't completely obliterate all this, but that it's knocked way back comparatively from this. So there'll be enough contrast between the two. So on this one, I think what I'll do is find sort of a pale bluish color. I might be able to use this unbleached titanium for the other one, but I want to make this be a lighter shade of what I see going on here. The other thing I want to do though is I want to create another border so that some of this beautiful color that we ended up with shows. So I can tape off up to about here now. I can move my tape in. If I do that on this, I'm going to lose part of my mushroom. And so what I think would be interesting is to go ahead and have that break the border of this new border. So I'm going to bring everything in about 1/2 inch, I think. Let's just have a look here. If I bring it in 1/2 inch, I think that'll work just fine. So I'm going to make some little marks so I can tape this off straight. Now, what you don't want to do is create a tangent. So had I gotten any closer to that cap, I would have made that be a lesser border. Now I can paint between, I'll tape this off and I'll paint all the area around the mushroom in that lighter tone. And pay attention to how much pressure you put on it. I'm not going to put very much pressure on there at all because I don't want it to tear up my paint. So I'm just barely tapping it down along that one edge. I'm not even letting it, I'm not worried about how much more it touches because I don't want to pull this off and have it rip my paint up. And if you have some low tack tape, or maybe run it on your hand first so that it's not so sticky, that might be better. You just don't want to undo everything you just did. Another thing you could do is tape off and just mask out this area and then use the whole side for type. But I think I'll use the same strategy over here. Alright, I've chosen for this one to use the titanium, the unbleached titanium acrylic, but I'm going to water it way down. I've got some brushes that I only ever use in acrylics. I wouldn't want to do this with my good watercolor brushes, of course. And so I'm going to mix some water into this because I want it to be a fairly watery layer. I want those colors to show through still. I just want to knock them back a little bit. And I can always go back over it with a second layer if it's not enough. But let's start out this light. And if this brush is too big, and it will be when I get into the detail, I'll switch over to a smaller brush. But I'm just laying down one layer, and I don't want to mess around too much because it'll bring up some of the water-soluble crayon if I have it on there, because I think it stays active. For the most part it was acrylic, and so I probably won't reactivate anything by doing this. But I want to get the brush strokes out of it, the more detailed portions of it. And I can see already that's not going to be light enough. I'm going to need to lighten it some more, but it's always better to start off with more water than you think you might need, because you can't undo this as easily as you could if it were watercolor. And you can always make it lighter. So that's the idea. I'm not worried about losing my lines. They were only there as guides. I will come back in with paint markers later and redo my outlines, but I'll probably finesse them a little more than I had when I just got that on there. But the main thing is I don't want to get into my mushrooms. I want to leave them alone for now. And then same thing on this side, but I've chosen some different colors. I'm going to actually go a little darker on the outside than on the inside on this one. So I'm going to mix up some water into this dark blue. And I also have a turquoise metallic acrylic that I think I might drop in. So it may not be exactly a flat wash on the back this time. It might be a little more of what we've been doing, only darker. So I'll start off with this darker blue. But again, it's watery enough you can see what's going on underneath here. And then I'm going to work right up next to that mushroom. And I can always add more color or more saturated so it's less see-through or darker, so that there's a stronger contrast. Because that's what I really want, is to have this be enough of a contrast that you can really see the difference between the mushroom and the background. Now, I'm trusting that the tape is down well enough that nothing will seep through, but it's possible, so I'm trying not to let too much water come up to that edge of that tape. And on this one, I'm not shooting for as even of a coverage as I was there. In some cases, stuff will show through, and in others it won't. And I'm about to bring in some of that metallic as well. And I'll water that down a little bit, but the metallics have a little more opacity to them. I'm going to leave that dry now and work on this one again. I may darken up my background a little bit in another layer, but let's let that dry. And I'm going to come back with another more watery layer, another watery titanium, unbleached titanium acrylic around this mushroom here. But I definitely need it to be lighter in order to put type on top of it. It needs to be considerably lighter or considerably darker so that the type shows up. This one's probably dry enough to put one more layer of darker color up at the top there. I really want to strengthen the separation. And so this time without much water at all, I'm going to come back along that top and just get it quite dark. Because that mushroom area there is also quite dark. The best way to really cover that up is like this. Really make that strong separation. And I may do the same up in this region here. So in this case, the background that we did do is almost obliterated, which is totally fine. It's a good idea to lift the tape carefully while your paint is still somewhat damp. I'm finding that at least on this one, the paint did leak underneath a little bit, but if you take a clean brush with a little water on it, you can run along the edge and just clean that back up. And we are going to draw a line around this and do more border work anyway, but let's just get this where it's leaked over a little bit cleaned up. And now you can see how it breaks that border. There's still one more border when we peel the very outer edge of the tape off. And we could do some line work and decorative elements inside of this border as well if we'd like. So now that absolutely needs to dry. Let's just have a peek and see if this has done the same thing or if it was a little cleaner edge. For some reason this side, maybe because there's less water involved. And you can see that when I peel this, I'm peeling it at a 45-degree angle. It wasn't stuck down very hard on purpose because I didn't want it to rip my paper. But if I bring it off at a 45-degree angle very slowly, I'm less apt to rip paint off. Now, I say that, and it's possible that some areas still will rip. There's only a little bit of leakage on this one. I can go right along in the same way and sort of clean that edge up, because that paint is still somewhat damp. It's not like watercolor, however, and you're not going to be able to remove it once it dries. So I'm going to also tear this one back very slowly. Peel, not tear. And there's a little bit of paint leakage, but not much. And now we'll go on to the sketchbook pages, the larger ones, in a similar fashion. On these, I'm going to try a little different approach. On this side, I'm not going to tape any more of a border. I'm going to just go with this metallic gesso again over the top, but around my subject matter. And on this side, I will tape it off, but I'm going to do more color than light. So this one, I'm just going to go right back over the top and start with this. I may have to lighten it more, but I think this will probably do what I'm after. I'm not watering it down, but because it's a thinner, more transparent paint, you can still see through. Just not sure yet whether that'll be enough to separate the background from the mushroom. As I get further down in, and if there's not a strong enough distinction between the two, background and foreground, I may lighten this up. But let's let this dry for now, and let's go over to this one on the other side here. This one I will mask off. I will come in a little bit, just a little bit from the edges. And I'll mark that off with pencil first. Again, about a ½ inch. This one had no tape anyway to begin with, so it had never had a border of any kind. generally speaking, you can have a larger border or bring your mat in or your frame in more at the bottom because it bears more weight. All right, so again, I'm going to only lightly tape this, but enough to where the color doesn't bleed through if possible. Okay, and on this I'm going to use a much lighter green initially, and maybe some golds down at the bottom. So I'm mixing a fair amount of white into this time to bring my knock my color back, because I have all this dark purple to go over. I just want a really strong definition between that top of that mushroom and my background. And while I'm not so worried about the colors being true, I do see some of that in here, and the application of it knocks the purple back to look more like those trees, and that's not the goal, of course, but it does help in this instance. And then just go right up against that mushroom cap to really set it off this time. And as I work my way down, I'll get greener, less white and more green, but avoiding those little extra elements that I threw in, and I'll have to use a much smaller brush to do that. And you may choose not to have anything that small in yours. And I'm bringing in more water as I work my way down, because there's less worry about having contrast at this point down in this area. And that's probably where some type will go as well. I do need to switch down to a smaller brush now. I need to let both sides of these pages dry now before going on to the next step. On the left side image here, I'm going to come back in and put in some indication of leaves. Not trying to draw leaves per se, but just to put a little more interest in that background. I've decided to come through and mask off this area. Now the sun's come out quite bright, so it's going to be difficult for you probably to see what I've done. But I cut out a mask out of cardstock and placed it on top of this area. I'm also going to mask this off so I don't get it involved in what I'm about to do here. I've got some walnut ink And I'm just going to spray this, hopefully lightly. And I'll start by spraying from a distance and then determine whether I need to do more or not. And then we'll let that dry and see how that did. But I can peek underneath there for now without moving it too much and see that there is quite a bit more distinction. So we'll let that dry. Well, we've come to one of my most favorite parts of this process, the last little details, including outlining the mushrooms and putting in some highlights with stencils or stamps. If there's a place that you feel like needs a little push, either lighter or darker, I had an area right here that was quite dark that was butted up against that dark that I wanted to knock back a little bit. So I did a little bit of texturizing here with some of these nondescript letter or word stamps and just put some lighter greens up in this area. Or for instance, if you want to sort of hint at the spots on the Amniota mushroom, you could use some of these stencils with holes in them or some other texture or some drywall tape. Anything that can give you just sort of a random dotty, spotty blending tool and with stencils or stamps. You could also start thinking about your type at this point and how it's going to land, and I know mine will come in here or in here on these. It may even come across into the mushroom on this one because it's sort of fantasy colored and the type could kind of play into that. So the next step will be to use paint markers for the outlining, and I would use probably a finer tipped one. Always be sure to shake them and then test whether the fineness of the tip is going to be what you like. And in this case, I think it'll work pretty well. So I'm just going to outline the mushroom cap, make a nice clean line. And this one turns out to be a lot bolder than I wanted, but it's okay. This one's that very fantasy colored one anyway. You could use a smaller cap, smaller tip on other parts of it. I've just wiped some of the ink off to see if that helps. And I could always go down to a smaller tip. That actually worked pretty well. It does seem to be leaking a lot of paint. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, sometimes they really work. That's a nice bold line, and that's quite all right. And I'm actually going to take off and go to the border and not drag that down any further. The remnant of where I initially drew it is still there, but I'd like to just continue this border this way. You probably want to do this with a straight edge. I need to find a dry place to put my hand to steady it when I draw this line, because I want to make it in one straight go. And again, you may want to use a ruler, and I may use it on another one, but this one, I've already started with it real open and loose like that. You could take little stamps that have a leaf pattern, maybe something like one of these, or even some small mushrooms. That might be kind of fun. But I'm going to stop on this one because I want to make the type be the main feature on this one. And I'm pulling this off. It's been on there now for over a day, so it's going to be pretty sticky. But I'm getting a nice crisp edge. It's too bad it wasn't straight. And I might go back and fix that by painting another border or using a paint marker to clean that up. And then this one will come halfway over and I'll have to stop. Now it did leak underneath there, so I do probably want to come and repair that border. Now there's some other things you can do within this border, and I'll show you that in a minute here. Again, with a paint marker most likely. But that's created quite an interesting, I might fix this up by putting some white along here. Maybe even a white gel pen would be all I'd need just to clean that up. That one's ready for type in my mind. This one I'm not quite done with yet. I want to try a couple more things. I'd like to keep it protected just a little bit longer and put down some of this drywall tape. But I was thinking it might be fun to put it down here in this border and take some brown or some gold, put that in there through this, draw right on it through it, and we'll just start with a little corner and see how it works. And it does, it puts a really interesting pattern in. It'll kind of, I don't really like the way this one ended, and so I can kind of mask some of that off by going back through. And I'm not putting the same amount of pressure everywhere, so it's gonna sort of be a hit or miss, which is gonna be lovely. It's an interesting pattern down there. And then I may continue it up here a little ways, and it can go on the background or on the board or both, just for a little more interest, and mirror that down here. And perhaps even bring it a little bit up into this area. And what I'm getting at is these leaves I see, and I sort of got it up there like I see it. Now I know that these have nothing to do with leaves, but it just brings that color in there, and I think it helps. So you could draw some sort of little pattern around the outer edge, you know, some little swirls or something. Or you could do a more precise pattern, you know, a long line of dashes or something. Or you could just use this pen to outline your border. So I may not outline this one in black, I might just use this gold gel pen to outline this border. And you could certainly use it for the mushroom as well. I'm going to drag right through that. And decided to kind of have my line randomly be the background, the original background color, and then go to gold. Maybe come back to the background color up here, I don't know. But let's peel this back and see what all we have that's happened underneath, how much damages we'll have to make or repair. I may need to put a harsh black line around the outer edge on this one just to clean it up. We'll just have to see. It's pretty clean for the most part, and it's a little straighter than the other one. This one could have little tiny dots of, or flecks of copper or something in the outside edge, I don't know. There's just so much you could do, but at some point you have to stop yourself because it gets too much. On this one, I'll just go with a very dark black outline. Some of the ink I sprayed on there is still a little wet, and so it wants to skip. And on this one, I would like to put a nice straight black border all the way around it, and I'll use this one and my ruler, which I've now marked all up with black ink. I think I should start on this side, and in this case it's really important to get it good and straight and try and do it in one pass. I untaped this and discovered that I really didn't like the harshness of those leaves in there, so I'm just hinting at a fern by using the water-soluble crayon through this stencil, creating sort of a look of a fern and a look of a leaf down here, and leaving it go at that. There's a couple other things I might do to this, but I'll probably call this one done, and I definitely want to put a lot more textural stuff. I'm not happy with this color in there, so I'm going to do some more work on this side. As one final step on this side that I'm a little happier with the colors on now, I've put some acrylic paint along the edge of this tool, and I'm just creating sort of fern-like strokes off of that here and there to hint at the textures I see in the image here.